Hi, this is Maria Morgis. I want to share a story with you about something I learned or rather experienced. It was an epiphany, really, and it occurred at a full day workshop featuring Bob Proctor. As always, he was in exceptional form, relaxed, funny, and intelligent, brilliant. He was just bang on. He brought up some rather interesting points that day. One in particular that I'd heard many times before, and yet for some reason on that day the lesson really sank in. It was quite the aha moment for me, and I was so impressed by what I finally understood that I ran home and made some notes, and those are what I'm here to share with you today. Just to give you a visual, this was a weekday event held close by at the Sheridan Parkway in Richmond Hill, Ontario. There were over 400 people in attendance, primarily businessmen and businesswomen. It was almost a sea of well-tailored suits. Bob flew in the CEO of one of his companies, Life Success Corporate. Her name was Sandy Gallagher, and he flew her in from Seattle to present with him. About an hour before we broke for lunch, Bob introduced Sandy and asked her to share her story with us. So she began by telling us that, she was first introduced to Bob's work at a seminar. She was fascinated with the material. Her fascination drove her to study all of his programs, and she soon developed a passion for his work, which then became a healthy obsession. She had a vision of taking some of Bob's material, reworking it, and presenting it in a different format that would benefit and really target corporate America. Now, this was a big diversion from her career at the time. She had a thriving, successful law practice in Seattle. Now, she herself was a very accomplished, brilliant, and highly respected attorney who was considered by her peers to be top in her field, which was bank mergers and acquisitions. Now, Sandy could be described as an overachiever. She certainly was a tremendous success and continues to be. And yet, she admitted to being almost paralyzed by fear when she began to contemplate making a career change. She graphically recalled the terror that she felt just before she pressed the send button on her computer. She was sitting at her desk, she said, and was about to send an email that would go out to about 600 recipients, among them her peers, her clients, friends, acquaintances, and the email was telling them of her decision to leave her practice and move into a different industry. Fear of what her peers were going to think and of how her family was going to react and the possibility of failure almost paralyzed her. She had come up against a wall of terror. She knew she had to make a decision, either move forward or stay where she was. She pressed send. Well, I was standing at the back of the room, so I had a great vantage point of the audience, and I could see their reaction to Sandy's story, especially, when she was talking about the terror she felt. There was almost a unison of bodies leaning forward towards the stage and of nodding heads. Clearly, that audience resonated with her fear, and I was one of those people. In fact, at that time, I was a founding partner in a manufacturing facility in the Toronto area, and I too was being pulled to make a career change. This after 30 years in the same industry. Now, talk about fear. So, that scene caused me to look long and hard at the emotion of fear and the role it plays in my life and in the lives of everybody. I've learned that fear can, to a great extent, be overcome or at the very least be minimized, and that starts really by understanding it. Most successful people are very familiar with fear because they face it all the time. But they will all tell you that fear is never a factor to be considered in deciding whether or not to move on an idea. Rarely does anyone reach a high level of success without becoming proficient at facing down fear. And yet, no one really questions what that is all about or even to what extent it is necessary. I mean, of course, I speak from personal experience because fear was never something that was discussed at my dinner table, nor did I ever consider it to be a very important factor that needed to be mastered in order to be successful. Anyways, Bob Proctor calls it the terror barrier for very good reason. He uses the word barrier because that is what stands between us and our goals or us and our dreams, and more often than not, that terror barrier prevents people from moving forward. Now, I realize that fear is a lesson that needs to come out of the closet because it is a doorway to many breakthrough personal and business successes. And I also knew I had to better understand fear to work with it. It's an emotion that is too often misunderstood, and more often than not, it results in holding people back from any great achievement. I can remember many times when I've stubbornly made a decision and moved forward because I wanted something so bad. My desire was stronger than my fear, and so although I had fear, I faced it, I ignored it, and I persevered. Yet I never really stopped to analyze what happened. What happened was that I had made a firm decision and stuck with it, and nothing, not even fear, was going to stop me. You know, looking back on that too, I realized that they were some of the best decisions I ever made. So, if we can agree that fear can be a deal breaker or a fortune breaker, then we should also agree that it's worthy of some introspection. So, let's look at the technicalities of fear. Um, Franklin D. Roosevelt has a famous quote about fear that we're all familiar with. He said, and I quote, "There is nothing to fear but fear itself." How right he was. He was basically saying that fear exists only in our minds. Dr. Maxwell Maltz, a highly celebrated plastic surgeon, psychologist, and author of many books, among them Psycho-Cybernetics, described the feeling of fear this way. He wrote, "The fear feeling is a natural temporary response to unfamiliar and uncomfortable instructions you send to your servo mechanism. By this, he means our conscious mind. But," he goes on to say, "you are separate from your fear. You and your fear feeling are not one and the same. You can honestly acknowledge that you feel fear about doing a particular thing, but then go ahead and do it anyway. And most of the time, the fear feeling will be dissolved by the action." My good friend, playwright and author Robert Joseph Ahola also writes on the topic of fear by stating that we are driven by only two emotions, love and fear. Now that is profound. He goes on to write that our realities of love and fear, the two emotions that drive us as human beings, are self-limiting. Of course, I would add that these are only self-limiting if we permit them to be through our own ignorance. If we take the strength of those emotions and use them to propel us towards our goals, instead of repel us away from our goals, we can achieve tremendous things. You know, it's also been noted that if we repeatedly face down fear and refuse to allow it to dictate our decisions, then this practice alone will have the effect of developing our mental capacity and fortitude so that future encounters with this emotion will result in a less intimidating and debilitating experience. Let me put this another way. Repeatedly facing fear and not allowing it to dictate our decisions and course of actions does have a numbing effect, and over time becomes a more manageable and less intense feeling. Let's take a closer look at fear, what it is and how it develops. And by the way, the fear that I'm talking about here is not the fear that comes along when we are suddenly faced with danger. That is a fear that is not to be ignored. The fear we're discussing is the one we need to work through, and it's the fear that we create in our own minds. It comes from a decision or event that generally involves making a bold change or doing something that we've never done before, something radically different. It causes us to begin to worry, and then the worry turns into doubt. The doubt will progress to anxiety, and then finally the anxiety becomes fear. So, you know why? Do you know why? If you ask enough successful people, you'll find some who claim they do not ever feel fear. It's because they are such great decision makers. They make decisions so quickly that there is no time to ponder and go through those stages of the worry, doubt, anxiety, and fear. Or alternatively, it could also be because they face fear so often that they become numb to the emotion. But let's touch on great decision makers. These people are very productive. They move quickly and they waste no time. Fear may come later, but once their decision has been made and they've committed themselves, then come rain or shine, the show is going to go on. They almost avoid the terror barrier simply because they make such quick decisions and they move forward so fast that fear really doesn't have a chance to develop.